Many of the people that reserved spots to buy the Aston Martin Valkyrie have now returned their request and don't want to buy their cars. Why would so many people suddenly not want to buy one of the most advanced hypercars ever? People wanted the car and now do not? Well, it turns out there's a lot of problems with the Aston Martin Valkyrie and how the politics around the car will be handled. This video will be an in-depth walkthrough of everything behind the scenes with the Aston Martin Valkyrie and what makes it such an amazing car, and also why there's so many problems surrounding it. Somehow, the story of the Aston Martin Valkyrie starts 20 years ago in 2004. The energy drink Red Bull had been sponsoring Subaru for a while, but it split ways with the Swiss team when they decided to buy the Jaguar team from Ford. To Red Bull, buying the F1 team was much more than publicity. They wanted to create a team that would actually dominate the F1 scene. But there were a few roles that needed to be filled before the team could get anywhere near competing for a title. First, an advisor, a team boss, and a technical director. For the advisor, Red Bull chose Helmut Marko, a seasoned race driver who raced with F1 and in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. He also worked with Red Bull's junior racing team. For the technical director, they chose Christian Horner, who raced when he was younger and also worked with Red Bull's junior team. For the final spot, technical director, they took McLaren's Adrian Newey, who was one of the finest engineers and designers that the sport of F1 has ever seen. The new challenge of Red Bull, along with the mindset to create the greatest F1 team, intrigued him, and that's why he joined the team. After a few mediocre seasons to get the feel and iron out everything, along with the rule change in 2009, they were able to complete 4 following years and win the championship back-to-back. This complete dominance of Red Bull made Newey bored of working in F1 and wanted something else. But Red Bull understood how important Newey was to keep, so they let him work on other projects. So he worked on sailing yachts, but he still wanted to work on his ultimate dream, building the ultimate street-legal sports car. During this time, 2 very big things happened that would make Newey's dream to build the ultimate street-legal sports car possible. The first is that Red Bull created Red Bull Advanced Technologies, an entity inside Red Bull that would use the technology from their F1 cars and use them on street cars. Red Bull created this branch because of the budget capacities, and they wanted to keep most of their team without firing them. This was also a good way for Newey because he was now able to work on other things in the F1 team that wasn't just focusing on the F1 car. The second is that Andy Palmer, the CEO of Red Bull's sponsor Nissan Infiniti, became the CEO of Aston Martin in 2014. The partnership between Aston Martin and Red Bull became very strong, and this led to the partnership between Red Bull Advanced Technologies, a group that wanted to use F1 technology in street cars, to be connected to a reputable supercar manufacturer. This is a great place for Newey, because he could create his dream car. Both companies worked together to create a concept for the hypercar that was first revealed in 2016. The story is a bit different from the side of Aston Martin. One of the most profitable dealerships was in Switzerland. The dealer sold most of the most expensive and highest performing Aston Martins. Because of this, the dealer attracted the wealthiest buyers. So when in the early 2010s, when the 918, LaFerrari, and P1 all came out, the customers wanted an Aston Martin that could compete. The Swiss brought up the idea to the CEO at the time, but he felt that the idea was silly and told them no. But when Andy Palmer became CEO, the idea was brought up again, and he really enjoyed this idea and gave them the approval. But during this time, the Swiss created Nebula Project AG. The details are not public between Nebula AG and Aston Martin. But what we do know is that Aston Martin will have to pay a royalty for every Aston Martin Valkyrie sold, and all the Valkyries will have to be sold through Nebula. Let's step away from the politics for a second and talk about the design. Adrian Newey was the head designer of the car, and since he had no affiliation with Aston Martin before, he had a plain sheet to create whatever he wanted. He set some ideas for what kind of car he wanted. He wanted a pretty car that somebody would want to look at. He wanted the car to be fast on the track, but also on the street. He felt that the car should be comfortable since it was a road car, and that people should enjoy driving the car. One of the big things he wanted was the car to be small. This could allow for the car to be more maneuverable and nimble. And lastly, he wanted the car to sound nice. One of the most interesting parts of his design was how he had the passenger sit. It was reclined with lifted feet, similar to the position of an F1 car. This also allowed for more comfort. Normally to create more downforce, the cars are lowered, but the Valkyrie is not super low to the ground. In fact, there's a lot of space underneath the car. Well, if the car is too low, it creates suction peaks and sucks the car to the ground, which creates bouncing. This was in the F1 cars not that long ago. Another thing is that more air that you have underneath the car, the more forces you can create. The car works well by moving air from the front to the back, having flaps that control where the air goes, and separating it to the exit underneath the car, either through the front wheels or vortex paths to the engine. I simplify this hugely. If you want to learn more, check out B Sports series on the design and aerodynamics of the car. Newey also had to pick what kind of engine the Valkyrie would have. He was between a turbocharged V6 and a naturally aspirated V12. The V6 would have been considerably smaller, but with the turbos created a lot more cluster, because the considerable amount of cooling that would be needed. The V12 would also create a better sound, which is something that Newey wanted. Taking this into account, he used the NA V12, because it would sound better along with being much longer, which would allow for more stiffness in the car. When looking for a V12, Newey could have just used an engine from Aston Martin that was already made. But he convinced Aston Martin to go to an external engine maker, Cosworth. He went to Cosworth with a few requirements: a high-revving V12 that could keep up with the modern-day emission standards, and durability requirements. After 14 months, the engine was ready for rigorous testing, and the engine stood with the requirements greatly, and the engine was ready to be put into the car. Now this project was nowhere near cheap, and they needed a big cash injection. This came in the way of Lance Stroll coming into Aston Martin. He fired Andy Palmer and replaced him with Tobias Moores. This cut the connection between Red Bull and Aston Martin. The development costs of the project were still very high, and selling Valkyries wouldn't even get them out of the trouble, because they would still have to pay royalties to Nebula. And suddenly, Aston Martin is suing Nebula for holding prepayments. There's very little known about this lawsuit, since most things are confidential. What we do know is that Aston Martin could possibly have a $150 million case back at them from Nebula. With these complications, now many of the buyers who originally bought a spot for the Valkyrie have pulled out their money for other hypercars. Why? Well, the complication with Nebula making it questionable if they will get their hypercars soon or any time at all. On top of this, the car has insane maintenance cost. With every 50,000 miles you'll need to get a new engine, they'll cost about $500,000. This is all understandable, but Aston Martin has also started making a few, and they say they will create every Valkyrie that has been ordered. This is very complicated, and I don't know what will actually happen. But probably the best thing we can look forward to is that Adrian Newey has said that the Valkyrie will not be his last road car. And if he makes cars like this, I can just imagine what else he will be able to cook up in the future.